Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm bringing you another recent reads video. So I mentioned in my last recent reads video that I would be filming two at the same time because I read a lot of books in between being able to film, having time to film. So I'm going to be talking about 5 books today that I've read recently. One of them I actually finished this morning, so this is super recent. I'm not sure that this is going to be a very long video actually, because a couple of the books are ones that I had to read for uni, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about them, but I thought I'd tell you a little bit about them anyway. And if you're interested in some of the stuff I'm reading for uni, I can certainly talk a lot more about that in another video if you'd like, so do let me know if you're interested in learning about some of the stuff I've been studying. But for now I'm just going to talk about these 5 books. So the first book I'm talking about today is Round About £1 a Week by Maud Pember Reeves. This was actually really fascinating to be reading around now. This was written in 1913. It was first published. Maud Pember Reeves was a member of a group called the Fabian Society, and they were campaigning for living wage, a national basic income to allow working class people to actually be able to live in nice environments and feed their families. The title Round About £1 a Week is the rough amount that a working man would earn, an average wage of the amount these families would have to spend on, like, not just on their food but like all of their requirements, so rent and coal and clothing and burial insurance, because if one of the kids died then they needed to be buried, so they would pay into this fund to be able to afford to give their kids a proper funeral, because that was fairly common in those days because of some of the conditions that she describes in this book. And I really want to stress that she's writing about working class people, so these are not people on benefits or living off the state. These are people that are earning money but then not earning enough money to have a comfortable life. So she talks about like some of the living conditions, some of the type of accommodation they live in, and the fact that like for most of their meals they're just eating bread because that's all they can afford to eat regularly. And she goes into a lot of the conversations that we are still having today about like people saying, well, if you can't afford to feed your kids, you shouldn't have kids. Well, this was written in a time when they didn't have like all the access to contraception and stuff that we have today. But she talks a lot about it's really hard to put that expectation on a man who is earning money to say, oh no, until you can like earn enough to keep a wife and family, you shouldn't get married. So she's saying like why shouldn't these people have the comfort of having a supportive family around them? Why do middle class and upper class people expect working class people to be deprived of having family, having comfort and having enough to live on and live comfortably? So she breaks down a lot of the myths that people were reciting in those days, and it was really fascinating to be reading this at a time when we were having a debate in the UK about whether children on free school meals should be allowed to eat during school holidays, which is what the argument boils down to. And so many people saying, well, their parents are not spending their money in the right way if their kids can't afford to eat. I'm like, that's not the point. It's not the kids' fault for a start, but secondly, a lot of the stuff she talks about in here about all the things that money has to go towards, like rent and bills and just the type of food that is nutritional, that is good for children to eat, is not affordable. And you get people on Twitter putting up these recipes like, oh, a boiled egg and a bit of bread, you know, that only costs like 30p per portion. You can't live on that. You don't get all the nutrients you need from that diet. And it's always people that have never had to live on that amount of money that are offering these really horrendous suggestions. And then you also get people saying, oh, if they can't feed them, why do they have them? Well, actually, in the global situation we are in at the moment with a pandemic where loads of people have ended up losing their jobs through no fault of their own, and there is just such a lack of money at the moment. Like, a lot of people that their kids are on free school meals probably when they had the kids could afford to have kids, and then their circumstances have changed and there just is not enough compassion in the world at the moment. And I'm gonna get down off my high horse now, but there's this meme that was going round and it just keeps coming to mind every time I hear people just having a lack of compassion for other people, and not just about this, about stuff like Black Lives Matter and racial inequality, gender inequality, all of this stuff. There's this quote, and I can't remember who said it first, but it's, I don't know how to tell you that you should care about other people. Like, there's just this thing in society at the moment where I think we've become so individualistic that, and that's not just us as individual people, but like in terms of our government, that people get to a certain point where they're comfortable and they're like, well, I've managed to get here, so why can't everyone else? And yeah, we just should have a heck of a lot more compassion for people that are struggling. On which note, I'm going to stop talking about this book, but I really do recommend it. It's quite dense, like there's a lot of figures, there's a lot of statistics, and it's using the old monetary system that we used to have in the UK that I don't understand because I grew up in the decimal age. So I didn't fully follow, and I don't know how the money referred to in here would relate to today's money. Living conditions have changed, society has moved on in a lot of ways, but we still have kids going hungry in the United Kingdom in the 21st century, and that is not okay. So a lot of the lessons that are taken from this book we should be rereading and rethinking about. I actually put on my Instagram a series of quotes from this book that felt really apt when the free school meals debate was going on. So yeah, really highly recommend this. The next book I want to talk about, I'm only going to talk about briefly. It was one of the books I read for an essay I had to write recently, and I've actually left that book in my study because I'm useless. So it was called From Deborah to Esther by Lillian Klein. This is a feminist interpretation of a number of stories in the Old Testament of the Bible, looking at sexual politics and how women who are largely marginalised in the patriarchal society that the Bible was written in, how these women's stories have survived and why they have survived. It was really interesting. I didn't agree with a lot of her arguments, which was helpful because I was writing a comparative book review and had to critique. So the next book I'm going to talk about I also read for that review, and I used some of the arguments in it to critique Lillian Klein's arguments. She just has some very odd ideas, and she didn't necessarily argue her points successfully, but I did find it a really interesting take. What I found interesting, actually, I'll talk about this one as well. So this was the next book, was Lethal Love by Mieke, which is also feminist retellings of biblical stories. Some of the stories overlapped between the two books, which is why I chose these two books to compare. What I found really interesting was with both of these books, they start from the same point of wanting to write a feminist critique of biblical stories. They both used a lot of literary criticism and narrative criticism techniques. They used some very similar techniques, came to very different conclusions about the stories. I enjoyed this one more because I agreed with her arguments more, but that doesn't mean that I didn't take some stuff from Lillian Klein's book as well. And so it was really interesting to write an essay comparing them. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. If you want to hear more about some of the stuff I'm reading for uni, do let me know. I gave From Deborah to Esther 3 stars, largely because I didn't think she backed up her arguments very well. I gave this one 4 stars. I thought this was a much more solid book. And what I found interesting actually as well, was this one was written in the 80s, 1987, it's the same age as me. Lillian Klein's book was written in 2000, and she actually references this book, yet some of the stuff she does is openly critiqued in this book. So I was really fascinated that she would read this book, read the criticisms of some of the techniques that she used, and then still fall into those traps. So anyway, that's just a quick summary of my essay for you there. These two books, From Deborah to Esther by Lillian Klein and Lethal Love by Mieke. I'm not going to talk that much more about them, but as I say, if you want to know more about some of the stuff I'm studying, some of the stuff I'm reading for uni, it will come up because I'm writing a dissertation on representation of a particular biblical character in novels, so I'm going to be reading a lot of Christian novels and a lot of books relating to that topic to try and back that up. So they will come up in some of my recent reads videos particularly, but if you want to know a bit more detail about that, do let me know and I can talk more about that. Couple more books that I've finished a little bit more recently. I read The Map of Sultan Stars by Zain Jukadar. You may be able to see on the cover that it's published under a different name. Zain Jukadar is a trans man. I think he's fairly recently come out as trans, so this book was published before that. So I'm not sure, I think his more recent book is published under the name Zain Jukadar. So I'm not going to say the name that's on this cover because I think it's his dead name. It may still be a pen name, but just because I don't want to disrespect him by using his dead name, I'm not going to say it. If you want to find him on Goodreads, if you want to find this book on Goodreads, it is under the name Zain Jukadar on Goodreads as well. This is called The Map of Sultan Stars. I don't know if I said that. This is historical fiction set across 2 time periods. So the modern section is set in 2011. It follows the story of a young woman called Noor. She is 12, but I mean, I would class this as an adult book. I think it's intended for an adult audience, definitely not aimed at children. She is 12 and she and her family have just moved back to Syria, where her family are from, following the death of her father. So she and her mother and her 2 older sisters have moved back to Syria to a city called Homs. They live fairly near one of her father's best friends, and one day he's come round for dinner and the city is bombed and they have to leave, and they have very little left because their house has been bombed. So the story follows their journey to try and get to a place of safety in the city where her mother originally came from, I think it is, and where she still has family. And it follows their journey across different countries. So many things happen in this book. They go through so much, this family, all sorts of horrible things. And while this is fiction, I was very aware while I was reading it that what is described in this book is the experience of so many refugees in the world at the moment, that it just feels like they've lost so much already, and then in their efforts to get to a place where they can be safe, they just keep losing stuff. So to read that from the perspective of a 12-year-old girl as well was just really brought the whole thing really to life, so I really recommend it. The other storyline is set about 800 years before and follows another young woman who's slightly older called, I'm not entirely sure how to say this name, I did look it up and came across very different pronunciations, so apologies. I would say it as Roia, I'm not sure. Anyway, so she is in her late teens and her father has also passed away, so she leaves. She disguises herself as a boy and becomes an apprentice to a famous map maker, and he's on a quest to chart and make the first map of the region. There are several things that are really lovely about the way this book is written. One of them is that the story of Roya is fiction as well, but some of the characters in that are real. So Al-Idrisi, the map maker that she apprenticed to, was a real figure. So there's some good history of the region in there. But it's framed as the story of Roya is one that Noor's father used to tell her. And so having that parallel thread of how Noor comes to terms with is happening to her by retelling herself the story. And then the second thing is that their journeys follow each other. So the journey that Noor and her family take to get from Syria to a place of safety is very much along the same route that Roya and Al-Idrisi and their company took. And similarly, Roya experiences loss and heartbreak as well. Yeah, this book was just really, really beautiful, really hard-hitting in a lot of ways. I gave it 4 stars in the end, but it was really close to being 5 stars, and I think if I reread it, it would maybe go up. I just think it was a really difficult read in a lot of ways. There are a lot of content warnings that I need to give. I think what I'm going to do today, and what I will always do in these recent reads videos, is for every book that I read, I will link to the book trigger warnings website to be able to listen, because where it's been a little bit of time since I finished reading the book, I've had so much going on, I can't necessarily remember all the content warnings and I don't want to miss any out. So I'll link to the book trigger warnings website so you can find out about all the content warnings for this book. But it was really, really powerful. And following on from what I was saying earlier about having compassion for people, if you want to understand why refugees are trying so hard to come into the UK and to other countries, read this book. Even though it's fiction, it represents that story. For me as an outsider anyway, it represents that story really effectively. To make that something that's understandable, I want to try and read some more real life accounts of what refugees go through. But yeah, this was really powerful, so I really recommend it. And then the final book that I'm going to talk about today, I finished this morning and I really, really loved it. I read it quite quickly actually. So this is Half-Life by Lillian Clark. This was my first time reading a book by Lillian Clark, and she is really underhyped. Like, this is her second novel and it was really, really excellent, and I just have not heard anyone talking about her. I'm not even sure how I came across this book myself. It must have been something I read on Twitter during the first lockdown when so many authors had books coming out and they were worried about not being able to have book promotion events. So I must have seen a tweet referring to this book or something and thought it sounded fun, so I pre-ordered it. It is really, really phenomenal. I'm worried I'm going to oversell it now. This is YA contemporary science fiction. It follows a young woman called Lucille. She's 16. It's set in America, and so I don't quite understand how the years work. So it's the summer before she goes into her, I think, her junior year at high school. She describes herself as perpetual overachiever. That's the label that people have put on her, but then it feels like something she has to live up to. So she is always trying to get the best grades and be the perfect daughter and be the best friend she can be, but she doesn't entirely feel like she fits in with her friends at college. And then one day she gets an email from a company called Life Squared offering her the opportunity, well, she doesn't get in the email, it doesn't say it, but when she looks into it, she gets the opportunity to be cloned, and she thinks this would be a way to try and meet all of her life and social obligations. And so that's sort of the basic premise of the plot. And then when Lucy, her clone, arrives, things do not quite go to plan. For me, this is a really fascinating exploration of this need for perfectionism. Like, I really related to Lucille because I still have this drive to want to be the best person I can be, which is fair, you know, it comes from a positive place, but it ends up being a real pressure to try and conform to everyone else's expectations of you. And so that's something that Lillian Clark explores in this novel. She also explores fallout from divorce. Lucille's parents announce they're divorcing quite near the start of the novel. It explores friendship breakups and what that feels like, first love, first boyfriends, all these sorts of fairly normal teenage issues that are explored in a lot of YA contemporary novels, but with this extra angle of the science fiction element, the cloning element, and I think that just brings a really different perspective on those issues. So I thought it was really well put together from that perspective. And there's also a lot of diverse rep in this book, particularly among the side characters, but it's just in a really casual way. It's just like, it's this accepted fact about this person. Like, there's a couple of non-binary characters in there and they're just there living their lives. So it's like, it's not dramatic representation anyway, it's just this accepted thing about these people. There's a little bit of ethnicity diversity in there as well, and like both Lucille and another character like casually refer to whether people are aloe or not as well. So it's just really nice to hear that kind of language being used in quite a casual way. So it's just like, it's an accepted part, it's something you think about, you know, are you aloe cishet or not, and have that just so casually represented and not in a dramatic way was just quite refreshing to read as well. Yeah, I don't have a lot else to say about it, just I feel like this is an author we all need to get on board with. Like, both of her books have less than 1,000 reviews on Goodreads, and I just think that's really sad. I really want to read her other book now, which is called Immoral Code, which I think is more straight contemporary, although one of the main characters is a hacker, so I think there might be science fiction elements in there as well. That's sort of more of a company cast of characters, where this is very much focused on Lucille and her family. So I know in that other book there is one of the main characters is Arrow Ace, so I'm really keen to read that one soon as well. I gave this one 5 stars in the end. I mean, it was maybe slightly generous. Originally I was going to give it 4 stars, but just because I feel that not enough attention is being paid to Lillian Clark as an author or to this book, I wanted to give it a bit of a boost on Goodreads and try and up its rating a little bit, its average rating. So maybe slightly generously, it was probably more of a 4-star read for me, but I wanted to give it that extra boost. So maybe like at some point I'll reread it and we'll downgrade it slightly, but it was definitely like a solid 4 stars, maybe 4.5 stars. If you haven't read Lillian Clark yet, which I assume most of you watching haven't, because I only heard of her this year, like, she is a really good author that I think deserves a lot more attention than she is currently getting. That is it for today. Those are 5 books that I have read recently. Let me know. I think it's unlikely that you might have read any of those ones I've talked about today, but if you have, let me know what you thought of them, or if you'd like to read them based on what I've said. Again, that is possibly unlikely with some of the heavy theology stuff I've talked about, but never mind. Yeah, please do have a chat to me down in the comments about some of the stuff you've been reading recently as well. Please also like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already. That really helps me to grow my channel if people are engaging with it, and it lets me know that you're enjoying what you're watching. You can also follow me on my social media. I'm on Twitter and on Instagram and also on Goodreads. All that information will be listed in the description box below for you. But that's it for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!